Um, I'm Krishnavir Roy, and I have with me Aseel Al Yaqoub, who I will be interviewing for my Title VII project, Trailblazers Frontending Traditions. I would like to thank Aseel for being a part of this project. Aseel Al Yaqoub is a research-based interdisciplinary artist, award-winning artist who explores her Kuwaiti identity and her country's complex history through socially engaged art. Her academic approach towards art spans various fields such as history, architecture, and cultural sociology. Asil believes in producing art that asks questions and creates opportunities for dialogue and self-reflection. She has an MFA from Pratt Institute in New York and a BA from Chelsea College of Art in London. She has participated in exhibitions worldwide, including 17th Venice Architecture Biennale, 17th Venice Architecture Biennale, the third Karachi Biennale, and 24th Dobrova Biennale and the Jameel Art Center. Her work and essays are included in several notable publications, and I'm so happy that she made the time for me. So, what influenced your decision to pursue art after studying architecture?
Well, because of I think the fact that, I've always wanted to pursue art. It was something that I felt deeply connected to ever since I was very young. And due to the decisions that were made in the early 2000s, in order for me to have a really solid career, and I think we have this also in the global South. It's very often that you either have to be an engineer or a lawyer or a doctor. It's something that's like a reputable pursuit, especially since I did really well in high school. So it's like, well, I shouldn't just do art, and art's something that was perceived as a hobby or a side gig. It wasn't really something that was considered a career. So after practicing architecture for a few years, trying to make sure that this isn't something that I really want to do, from working at boutique firms to working to larger companies, to then establishing sort of my own practice, designing a few things here and there, came to the realization that it doesn't really bring me as much joy as the artistic endeavors that I was pursuing in tangent, the exhibitions that I was doing here and there, the residencies. And so in 2013, I made the decision to, after practicing for 4 years, that this is something that I want to pursue.
Mhm. I understand that because it's really common in places like South Asia as well, wherein if you want to pursue something which is not like engineering or medicine or accounting, I mean, you're not taken seriously. I mean, there's certain pursuits which you can do, and if you are in music or art, I mean, it's more challenging. Parents generally, I feel, do not want to support something wherein they don't know what will be the final outcome. It's not very steady. So I kind of relate to that. Yes. Um, you spent time working in the West, but then you found yourself consistently uh, pigeonholed as a female Arab artist in the diaspora. I read that prompted you to get back home. Why was that a problem? Weren't you breaking stereotypes that the West holds? Did you feel limited in any way?
So yeah, I mean, being an artist abroad and then being an Arab female artist is something that was, I was being categorized into exhibitions that under the titles or subheadings of an Arab female artist, or othered as sort of the more interesting exotic group of artists that are coming and residing in these Western countries. And I think there became a lot of instances where I got really tired of, explaining the context of Kuwait, since my work is very much revolved around identity, is that what is Kuwait? So rather than me having to, like just present the work, I have to present the context of my work. I have to present the context of myself. I have to answer questions such as like, is Kuwait like Saudi Arabia or Iran? What sets it apart? Do you dress like this in Kuwait? do you talk like this in Kuwait? You know, and so it just becomes less about the work and more about the fascination of me as an artist, in relation to other artists and the art scene there. And then there's also obviously the way in which we're orientalized, and that's what I mean by pigeonholed. It's like the idea of like, well, I've started to feel that if I'm going to be talking about Kuwait, my audience should be from Kuwait, or it should be at least a regional audience that can comprehend what I'm trying to say. Because most of the time, like you mentioned earlier, I'm asking questions, and the questions that I'm asking shouldn't be directed at the biggest criticism that I showcase a lot in my work, which is, you know, the colonial influences and impacts on Kuwait that are very, very subtle, but profoundly impact sort of what our identity means and who we think we are. And this brings questions to traditions and what are traditions versus what is culture. And so it's like, well, but rather than taking this top-down approach, which is a very also Western lens of let me look at Kuwait from a distance and analyze it from here, is I need to analyze Kuwait and be a part of Kuwait and be part of the society and be part of the contemporary, as well as the historic aspect of it, which is why I came back. But that doesn't prevent me from, you know, presenting my work here and then being able to then present it abroad, because then that creates, you know, a discourse between two different countries. But at least let's have that discourse here locally. And I found that the local is definitely more vital, more important in my work.
Okay. Okay. You went to Britain as a 17-year-old to study architecture. You came back after 6 years. Was there a culture shock in any way that you felt?
I mean, yeah, there was. Well, firstly, just to give you more context, I graduated from the New English School in Kuwait. Before that, I was in the English School Kuwait. So most of my, you know, education was centered around very British. It was a British system, basically. And so the next step was to go to London, and that made sense, you know, since I was so used to the British education system. Um, and you know, I admit this in a lot of my interviews where I was like speaking, thinking, dreaming in English, and Arabic. My Arabic was pretty weak. This could talk, you know, colloquially, you know, dialect wise, but you know, barely read any Arabic, barely communicated in Arabic. And so when I came back, you know, there a lot of projects stemmed out of this idea of like, who am I and where do I fit in? So one of these projects was the Year of Teddy, which was a blog that I started. Basically, when I came back, I didn't know what to do in Kuwait, where to go, you know, from having this independence in London to coming back here and having very little, you know, spontaneous occasions to attend. It was like, well, what do people do here? And so blogging at the time was before internet, before Instagram, before all of that, TikTok and stuff, was the thing that everyone would reference and look at for events, occasions, new openings for restaurants, etc. And so I decided to create my own blog where I would take this teddy bear, since I saw that it was a redundancy in the events that were being displayed. And I was like, everyone's going to the same places, but there must be more to just this whole idea of, you know, commercial, F&B, you know, collective vibe. So the bear, I would document a picture a day or a video a day or something a day, and I would just post one photo or one blog post with a short caption. And it was basically me taking this bear to different parts of Kuwait, whether it's Jalib Shukh, whether it's in various neighborhoods, whether it's him participating with, like on a boat with local fishermen, you know? So it was like he forced me to go out, or I forced myself to go out through it. And that's when I started to meet a lot of different parts of the Kuwaiti society, whether they were expats, whether they were people that I would have never otherwise gotten to meet, you know? And so it's created a really interested facet of circles for me. And then from there, I also realized, you know, I'm called the chicken nugget. And I don't know if you've ever heard this expression. I think in India you have coconut, which is, you know, we're brown on the outside,
Yeah.
white on the inside.
Yeah.
So it's a derogative term, but sort of like this idea of reclaiming that term, and so creating work out of that as well. So I created something called the Chicken Nugget Alliance,
Yeah.
which revolved around that theme. And from there, the integration became a bit more, it became easier, you know?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. What initially sparked your interest in delving into Kuwait's past through art? Uh, why did you explore the concept of national identity through your artworks? What are some of the main influences or inspirations behind your art practice?
Okay. So during to try to understand what my art practice is, it was like the biggest challenge during my MFA. It's like you have to graduate with a master's thesis, and this thesis show, and this thesis show is sort of like it's supposed to encompass what it is that your practice is. It's like otherwise, what's the point? So it was there that I realized that I knew very little about Kuwait's history. When asked questions by my thesis professor, I was trying to tackle global topics and concepts, globalization, economics, etc. I was really driven by political science. I was realizing more and more that I wanted to be a political artist in some shape or form. But I was taking on challenges when I didn't even know what Kuwait was. And so that helped me to look into what Kuwait was through history books, through archives, and then that's when I started reading more in Arabic and trying to understand, the different perspectives on what are the narratives that are being portrayed on and around Kuwait and by whom. So obviously a lot of our history is documented by the British. This creates a sort of one-sided perception on who we were and what we ended up becoming. And also made me realize that a lot of the institutions that are here in Kuwait are actually appropriations of that colonial system. And so that dependency is what drove me towards, focusing on this as my art practice, but it also includes nostalgia a lot as well. So the idea of, why do we look at the past and think, well, the good old days, especially in Kuwait in the 60s and the 70s, it's like, oh, those days were amazing. Look at Kuwait now. So we're like always questioning, like, who was it amazing for? And in the 80s, who was that amazing for? For a lot of people, especially during the Islamic Revolution, for a lot of people, that was the golden era, And then today, you'll see a lot of people say, no, now is the golden era. Look at us, we're living, a great life. Or on the contrary, who knows? So that's what then became the thing where I'd be like, what are the questions I'm supposed to ask? I'm not an artist that's going to create solutions. I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a cultural sociologist either. I'm not an anthropologist, but I am an artist, and we tend to want to mirror what we see and how we see things, especially in our surroundings. So it's like, well, if this was a great era, it was not achievable. And so why was it not achievable? And these are the questions that I raise through my work often. And yeah, basically, I think, yeah.
Okay. Um, Please tell us about the Chicken Nugget Alliance. I know you spoke a little bit about it, but if you could just briefly speak a little bit.
Sure. So the project, it was part of a residency, and we're looking at, landscapes expanded. And at the time it was 2012, and there were the upcoming elections, the parliamentary elections. Bear in mind, at that time, women couldn't run for parliament, I believe. So it was supposed to be a satiric parody where me, this chicken nugget artist is starting this political campaign under the emblem of like a roast chicken with the title The Chicken Nugget Alliance, creating media posters and starting a Facebook group, where we had like over 130 members all sitting and, making satirical jokes on different policies, whether it's, economical or sustainable, like we had the green group, we had, and people would just sit and, make memes out of this situation. I also created a campaign video, and this campaign video basically also shows that even though we're Western educated, and that's what the definition of chicken nugget is, it's like, okay, you're Western educated, therefore you have this sense of elitism that you're better, better, you'd probably rule the country better. And that's a misconception, because there's also a lot of superficiality that comes with that type of pedagogy. And we need to come clean about it and admit it, is that just because we studied abroad doesn't mean we know any better for anyone, And so that was the point. But I think a lot of people were really confused because I think it went viral or something, or somebody shared a video or shared the posters or something. and people were like, is she insane? Is she actually thinking about running? And the thing is that I wasn't even of age and didn't even realize that you need to be 31 to run for parliament. But there were things that were worthy of exposing, like is an elementary degree or a high school degree sufficient for you to be a parliamentary member? Or is that fine because we live through this very tribal culture also of like, well, we seek respect not through education, but through, experience, wisdom, etc. But then again, it's like, well, then anyone can run and anyone can win, and it kind of defeats the purpose a little bit. But then it's also extremely democratic in that sense. So it's like raising these questions around all of that, and then the idea of a woman running for parliament. So that's basically the project in a nutshell.
That's actually very interesting. Uh, what specific themes or symbols do you often explore in your artwork?
Definitely colonialism or imperial accounts. I delve into the British archives a lot. I use the Digital Library always to look at, telegrams between colonial agents and any kind of ruler or at the time, seeing the dynamics of the different regional countries like Kuwait's neighbors, through the eyes of Dixon, who was the political agent here at the time, the idea of documentation or Kuwait's documentation through the eyes of Violet Dixon, through the flora and fauna, or whether it's, her writings. And then it's this idea of also cross-cultural, like cross-cultural dressing or like, appropriation, institutional appropriation, bureaucracy, there's like even the military, to the point where even I looked into the military to see and understand whether these are actually our traditions or whether they were prescribed. And so most of the time, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to debunk what we're usually taught, or rather, I'd like to say that we're not taught, and raise questions around that and be like, why are we not aware of this? And how do we come out of this? How do we decolonize? How do we create our own sort of understanding of what identity is? Do we come to terms with the fact that we as Kuwaitis, for example, are a culture of taste, that we are a hodgepodge, that because of our cosmopolitan, metropolitan kind of society pre-oil, does that mean that we are a culture of appropriation? And should we come to terms with that, and if so, what should we and should we not appropriate at the same time?
Okay. How has Kuwait's artistic sphere evolved over the years? Do you find it challenging when you began your journey as an artist after returning to Kuwait?
Yeah, I mean, we have like two galleries now. I think they've come down. I don't know. I haven't heard anything from the rest in a while, but like consistent galleries, it's like, or like professional galleries are hard to find here, and we don't have that sort of platform for artists. So a lot of us tend to, ad hoc it or grassroot it, and a lot of us strive for international attention because that's the only place where we can kind of have, so a moment of light shining on the work that we create. But I do think that in most societies, the art scene is either it moves in between two things. It either moves into the realm of entertainment, where people just go to an exhibition because it's like a place to be seen, and it's like, oh, I'm so cool, I go to art exhibitions. Or it's like the very small, very few group of people that are actually really interested in what artists are doing, or want to do peer reviews, or sort of want to be inspired by what they see. Then you have the collectors, right? So the ones that just want to go and collect, and they see some kind of monetary value in what you're doing, or they want to support you in some shape or form. This is very weak in Kuwait. Like you don't have that sort of, like you don't have a really strong ecosystem for artistic development here. But what I like about it also at the same time is that it's not state run, which means like there was a moment where, a lot of people were saying, oh, look at Saudi, look at the Emirates, look at, Qatar, they're state funding everything. They're creating museums, they're opening galleries, and there's these opportunities for all of these artists. What's Kuwait doing? Kuwait's not doing anything. And I'm like, yeah, sure, but there's a beauty to that and a freedom to that in terms of like being able to showcase whatever it is that you want without this idea of national propaganda or being part of a propaganda machine. So that's something that I think is the pro of having of the art sphere here, albeit very, very, very small.
Mhm. I was just about to ask you about, and you answered it already, about the scene in places like Saudi, Dubai. You think it's better in ways, or um,
I think I think it's great that whatever they're doing is they're doing it, you know, and a lot of the people in their countries are benefiting from it.
Mhm.
But I also don't think it should be it shouldn't be a criteria for all states to pursue sort of the same uh, structure or ecosystem. And I think we can learn a lot from each other. It's like, well, in Kuwait, you know, they have the grassroots, so they can say whatever the hell they want. No one censors them. And if they do, it's sort of like a wishy-washy thing, and they get a lot of criticism for censorship. Whereas there, it's like, well, you can't present this without our consent, you know? So there's like this idea of working against the grain versus working with the grain that
Mhm.
artists are challenged with. And it doesn't mean that, you know, I don't have opportunities in Saudi or the Emirates or Qatar. On the contrary, I've been invited to all three countries and have participated in exhibitions there. And it's this cultural exchange, right? It's just that the only difference is that there's no spaces here in Kuwait for that exchange to happen the other way around.
Mhm. Okay. How do you perceive the role of art in sparking dialogue and introspection within society?
Hmm. Well, I think, you know, I don't know, but you know, there's types of art, so I can only speak of myself, but I think that because of my topics and the general like amount spent, you know, whoever knows of me here in Kuwait and understands my work would be like, I wonder what she's gonna talk about now. Because I've been seeing on my stories that I've been like posting a hell lot of military men and performances
Yeah,
and stuff,
yeah.
and they're like, what is she gonna show? You know, what is she talking about? What is the premise of this entire exhibition? What is she trying to say? Why did it take her 5 years to come to terms with this, you know? And so it's like, I'm a slow artist, so I won't do exhibitions like every 2 years or every year, you know? Whereas, you know, you have painters who can, because it's like more of a skill-based practice where they generate work and ultimately curate the work. For me, it's like the opposite. For me, it's like I have to read so much and go to YouTube wormholes and like, you know, recover and maybe do something on the side just to kind of distance myself and come back to it. It's almost like mini theses, my work,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of people are what they can learn from my work is like, well, I wonder what she's going to ask today, or I wonder what she's uncovered today. Because a lot of the times it's like, guys, did you know this? That's what my work kind of feels like. It's like,
Mhm.
did you know that this happened in the year, this, you know? And it's like, I didn't know. Did you know? You know, and I could expose it, talk about it, bring it to the surface, and have that discussion around it, you know? Sometimes it's hit or miss because, you know, you have all of this information, and then how do you translate that visually, right?
Yeah.
How can you be clever about it? And so that's the point of practice. It's like sometimes you fail, sometimes you succeed. As long as you keep trying to, you know, articulate yourself
Mhm.
visually, then you start to develop a language, and that language is something that I'm still trying to grasp.
Great. What challenges do you face in conveying historical elements in your work with today's context?
With which context?
Today's context.
Today's
Yeah.
context. Um, I think the challenge is to see or to try to make a connection whether the past actually influences the present. And if so, how does it do that? And so it's like a lot of the times I like to bring in past and present and future prospects into the work. So I always try to like the future becomes the question mark almost. And the present is intermingled with past relics or like ideas or facts or time markers. And so it's like, oh, this is what we like. If we're going to talk about one particular topic, this is who we were, and this is what we've become. What could have been the things that led to this situation, you
Mhm.
know? So one of the films that I did, which was like 100 soldiers somersaulting, was a 45-minute film where I used archival footage from 45 years ago up to
Mhm.
now. And so each like almost like minute by minute by minute by minute historical trajectory of Kuwait with some little subtle interruptions in between, which is where I'm asking the question through other archival footage. You know, it's like very random, sometimes funny, and then it suddenly switches to a really sad scene or like a really upsetting scene, like the Gulf War or like the terrorist attack that happened. And then it's like also mixed with like, you know, funny pop cultural stuff that we've generated. And that then brings everything holistically together to start to see, you know, like can we still connect the dots or not, you know? And it leaves people food for thought to do it themselves. But it's again, I'm not in the position to kind of like contextualize. I can contextualize, but not define
Mhm.
what our history is.
Mhm. Okay. Please tell us about your artworks, frenemies, and desperate measures. How well were they received?
So frenemies, interestingly, the concept of frenemies is that, again, using the political agents' telegrams at the time, seeing conversations between the political agents of Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi, and then the rulers of each sheikhdom at the time as well, between Sheikh Salim, King Ibn Saud, and yeah, so they basically document everything that leads up to the Battle of Jahra in Kuwait in 1920. And before that, there were also obviously territorial disputes. There was also a Zealot tribe called the Ikhwan who were like on the offensive in Kuwait. And there was a lot of, it was sort of a moment of minor instability because it was also the downfall of the Ottomans.
Mhm.
So this was before Kuwait's borders were drawn up, and obviously all leads up to that in 1922. And the Battle of Jahra was in 1920. And I was like, this is insane. Reading their letters back and forth, seeing how the British talk about us, and talk about our rulers and talk about this land as though it's like a cake they could carve, It's like, how do I best illustrate this? And so I created a WhatsApp group conversation where all these participants were, chatting and would submit some documents or like leaflets that I could find that were from these documents to try to legitimize it. A lot of the conversations were actually quote unquote, but I decided to not quote them so that people don't know what is actually real being said or verbatim, or whether, it's my words that I've summarized from these texts, with these emojis and stuff. That one I presented in the French embassy because it was part of like a cartographic workshop there, and it was funny to kind of make fun of the British in the French Institute, So it's like, because I do bring in the map of Sykes-Picot, and I show that that it was a part of the British and the French, and it doesn't make you French people exempt of these shenanigans. So that was very well received, especially by a lot of the African representatives of the embassies that came to visit, because like a lot of African states are still somewhat colonized by the French. And so they were there and they were like, this is really funny, and they were getting it, and the people who did attend, because it's like, again, it's an interesting place. It's not very, very public. It's like the people of the French Institute that come. So they were also like really shocked. They just didn't understand if this was real or not. Mm-hmm. And then with Desperate Measures is basically one of my more personal works. So usually I remove myself from my work, but with this one, I did do a performance piece, and it's basically during the Gulf War. I was quite young at the time, but I do have a visual memory of my family in the kitchen, stitching gas masks, like DIY gas masks, mm-hmm. Out of cloth, charcoal. And so I asked my mom to write the instructions for me. And I tried to do a performance piece where I follow her instruction in order to create this, DIY gas mask that the Kuwaiti resistance at the time were trying to disseminate and trying to help people to make, because of the fears of a chemical attack. And so then I just realized that, at the end of it, it's like, what's the point of this? Like, it's not going to work, you're obviously going to die regardless, So it became this concept of desperate measures. And, only if God willed, do you survive this or not? But it's like this idea of memory and trauma, not necessarily my trauma, but this idea of trauma that is this PTSD across Kuwait that a lot of people are in denial of, specifically those that were here during the Gulf War.
Yeah. Kuwait is a conservative society. There are certain strict do's and don'ts one has to follow. Do you find the strictures limiting?
Yeah, they are limiting, but I think to have limitations, it's great because then you have borders to work within. Mm-hmm. So as an artist, you don't want to have this full reign and freedom of doing whatever it is that you want to do, because you might lose yourself in the abyss. So for me, it's like, I like the idea of being constricted. I know this might be offensive to some people, so I won't do it. This might actually be too sensational, so I won't do it. This idea of being able to create work that respects the society that you're a part of, but at the same time challenges the status quo in a way where it's not detrimental towards any part of society. So on the contrary, I think these limitations are meant to be respected so that we can have the opportunity to engage with each other rather than fuel fights or, you know, further segregation and miscommunication.
Mhm. Do you self-censor your work?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know if it's self-censoring as much. Like there is a work that I did where I did self-censor myself, but it was because of the concept itself.
Mhm.
Sometimes I do feel like I will self-censor because I feel like I shouldn't be talking about it anyway, you know, let the work speak for itself. And so there's always this moment of like, how literal does an artist want to be? You know, do I want to be very literal, or do I want to be a bit more, you know, conceptual, or do I want to have have my work be a platform for discourse and discussion? Like, what is it that I want to be? And so it's less than self censorship and more like saying, putting a hard yes or no towards specific directions. Like, this is not going to work. No, don't do it. It's like almost a guiding point.
Okay. You've shown your work outside Kuwait. What has the response been like?
Um, Good. I mean, a lot of the exhibitions that I've shown, I haven't had the opportunity to go myself, whether it was in Canada or Berlin or, but I do get feedback back. So like either somebody will add a comment, or send me a message on Instagram being like, loved your drawings, or
Mhm.
whether it's somebody who the curator would come to me and say, you know, like a lot of people found your glass pieces extremely whimsical. So like I would get these responses from abroad, but it's ever since COVID, I haven't had the opportunity to do it. But I do have a couple of projects coming up soon, like that I'm curious to see what will happen because these I will be present for. So it'll be more interactive with the audience. So fingers crossed.
Best of luck. I hope it goes well.
Thanks.
Yeah. And
Same.
the last question, is it challenging for female artists to find a professional success in Kuwait? Has the situation changed over the years?
Success in art.
Yeah.
Mm. Um, I think with like with any other profession, it's like how serious do you want it, and how hard are you going to work for it? So the idea of being an artist requires a lot of self-discipline, like a lot. Like you have to wake up in the morning and tell yourself, these are the hours I'm going to work today.
Mhm.
Like how many hours of the day I'm going to work versus today is a day off because I needed to contemplate and to sit and read, and you know. So there's no 9 to 5, there's no punching in, punching out kind of thing. So who's going to be on top of you doing all of these things? And there's always, I feel like there's always this sense of you need to, you know, there's the saying of like tortured artists, and it doesn't necessarily mean like tortured in the sense like, oh, woe is me, like the world is horrible. It's more like you try, you fall, you try, you fall, you try, you fall. You send a few emails, you try to apply to grants, you try to apply to residencies, they reject you, they reject you, they reject you. And that's where it starts to filter out. It's like who's serious and who's not serious, and who's willing to grow and who's not. And in the art world, there's a game. It's just whether you want to play it or not, you know? And you have to find out from the beginning, what type of artist do I want to be? And so I think I'm seeing personally more and more young female and male artists, you know, and I'm actually, on the contrary, would like to encourage more male artists because it seems like it's even more embarrassing for men to pursue art because it's looked at, and especially culturally here, as something very feminine, you know. And if
Yeah.
you are an artist, you know, you should maybe pursue like calligraphy or something a bit more
Mhm.
masculine, like sculpture, or, you know, why are you painting? You know, it's like such a girly thing to do. So it's like the idea of it being gendered is I have an issue with, because I think there's like a really important opportunity for both men and women to be creating works and to see and perceive Kuwait from these different perspectives. So I think there is a growth, and I think that social media is actually compensating for the lack of spaces in Kuwait. So you'll have a lot of artists that are coming out and they're doing really interesting new media works that, you know, even I'm like, you know, I really like this aesthetic, or, you know, the ideas behind it, very interesting, that are already packaging or pre-packaged themselves with an online presence. And so you know, you don't need any artistic sphere that it's like grounded anymore to make contacts and network,
Perfect.
or showcase your work also.
Okay. That's perfect. Thank you so very much. I mean, thank you for your time.
Anytime.